President Trump will reveal the tariff rate on semiconductor imports this week. Here he is last night on Air Force One. Watch.
Mr. President, can you talk a little bit about the semiconductor tariff you posted on Truth Social today? What is the timeline for that?
That's right, but the tariffs will be in place in the not distant future because, as you know, like we did with steel, like we did with automobiles, like we did with aluminum, which are now fully on, we'll be doing that with semiconductors, with chips, and numerous other things. And that'll take place in the very near future.
You know what rate the semiconductor tariff?
I'm going to be announcing it over the next week. But we'll also talk to companies. You know, you have to show a certain flexibility. Nobody should be so rigid. You have to have a certain flexibility.
Meanwhile, Xi Jinping is in Vietnam this morning, part of a week-long trip aimed at strengthening ties with his regional trade partners in Southeast Asia. Beijing is halting shipments of critical rare earth minerals. Meanwhile, Xi says there are no winners in a tariff war while promising Vietnam stability. President Trump clarified the reported exemptions on smartphones, laptops, and other electronic products from China. Writing on Truth Social last night, there was no tariff exemption announced on Friday. These products are subject to the existing 20% fentanyl tariffs, and they are just moving to a different tariff bucket. Here's J.P. Morgan Chairman Jamie Dimon with me last week on this very issue. Watch.
There are tons of ways that people manipulate trade, but, you know, and as subsidies, and as land grants, and as guarantees. We need to do that for rare earths, pharmaceutical devices, semiconductors. There are tons of ways that people manipulate trade, but, you know, and as subsidies, and as land grants, and as guarantees. We need to do that for rare earths, pharmaceutical devices, semiconductor chips. We should do it right. I mean, we shouldn't do it in a way that wastes a lot of money and lets corporations feed at that great tax trough or something like that. And it could be done, but it will take years. But we need to start right away. And even some of these other supply chains, you know, a lot of companies are too reliant on one country. It'll take them to move. But I think you got to separate, you know, making sneakers from making guns. You know, one is like really important. One is, you know, it's not as big a deal. So,
Great point.
But the point about national security is economic security, national security are almost directly related in the long run.
And joining me now is White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. Kevin, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah, and I thought that point that Jamie made was really important. That's why I played that soundbite, and that is, it's not the same when you're looking at sneakers versus guns. Okay, it's not the same. It shouldn't be the same tariff or, you know, plan when you're talking about semiconductors or prescription drugs versus T-shirts. Can you walk us through the president's thinking on this?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the president has a comprehensive, detailed, very sensible plan to manage rebooting our trade relationships. And let's just go through it really, really quickly. And sorry, a lawnmower just went by, so I got to speak a little louder. So the first thing is that we've got this baseline tariff that right now is 10%, but could negotiate up from there if people don't make big concessions. But let's just say right now we've got a 10% reciprocal tariff, which is the baseline for the whole world. In addition, we have these things which are called 232 items, which are things that are really, really important for national security. And so the example I like to give when I'm explaining trade policy to graduate students is the way to think about 232 is that if you've got a cannon, but you've got cannonballs that you have to buy from the enemy, then if there ends up being, you know, some kind of action with the enemy, then you might run out of cannonballs really fast. And so it's okay to put a tariff on a cannonball. Now, for semiconductors, there are a lot of semiconductors in your car, in my car. There are semiconductors in military things. And so for a 232 semiconductor action, it's extremely important that we look at, and the president said he'll announce one this week, we look at the things that influence national security and make sure that we're onshoring that production so that if there ever were a problem in the future, that the U.S. would be 100% ready. And so if you put a semiconductor in, I don't know, a toaster, then that's probably not a national security matter. But in the end, what will happen will be the legal process. We'll decide what is a national security matter with guidance from the president's team and the president. And I got to say that this plan has been basically the plan from the beginning. From the beginning, we've been talking about which things are 232s, which things are covered by the Reciprocal Trade Act. And so nobody should think that there was a surprise or anything at the last minute last week.
Yeah, because that's what happened over the weekend. You know, you had some of your colleagues out. Howard Lutnick was on one show. Peter Navarro was on another show. And, you know, with some of them saying, well, there are no exemptions. And then somebody else saying, well, they're going to be in a different bucket. it created some confusion. Kevin, why did Customs and Border Patrol release that list Friday night then at 10 o'clock at night? Because when they released it, it seemed like it was new.
It's the normal course of things that when we say, hey, we're going to have this thing covered, then there'll be questions about, well, when you cover this thing, what about that thing? But they're exactly right. My friends are exactly right that there aren't exceptions. The thing is that we're deciding which things are covered in which bucket. And so what everybody decided is that for semiconductors, that there are going to be semiconductors like those in toasters that maybe we're not so worried about national security in semiconductors and toasters, but there are going to be a lot of things that will really be so focused like a laser beam, like a literal laser beam on. And that's been true from the beginning. And so it is true that as the process moves on, then the legal process and advisors and technical people at Customs, at Commerce, at USTR will decide, along with the president, what is a thing that's going to be covered under this 232. And that's a very, very natural process that happens all the time in every 232.
Well, this was very important, the way you just laid it out, Kevin, and we want to thank you for that, because you've identified the issue at hand, and that is these are national security issues. And we cannot allow national security to take a backseat to anything else. But when you're talking about these companies that the president would like to manufacture in America, how long is it going to take to fire up a semiconductor plant, to fire up, plants in America that actually will produce the things that are deemed so critical for this country?
Everybody that the president has talked to in this space has made commitments, big commitments, hundreds of billions of dollars, up to trillions of dollars, to onshore the foundries that we need to make sure that America has great semiconductors, the best semiconductor industry in the world, and actually very, very secure national security as well. And so right now there are things that are coming online that we negotiated last time, and then there's a horse race to see who can get here the fastest. And I think that the horse that wins that race is going to have the biggest prize.
Well, I mean, I wish the markets would understand that. That is huge. Okay, that is huge, that the president has been able to negotiate corporate America to fire up manufacturing plants here to make some of the most essential things. Now, Kevin, the market is also waiting to see who's going to do a deal first with the United States. I mean, President Trump said that the first deal over tariffs is close. How many countries are you currently speaking with? Are we going to hear our friends like India, Japan, South Korea among the first to make a deal on tariffs?
Right. We've got everybody in the trade team and even deputies of people in the trade team talking to just about everybody on Earth. And I think that we've got more than 10 deals where there's very, very good, amazing offers made to the U.S. That USTR Trade Representative Jameson Greer and Howard Lutnick and the rest of our trade team and the president are stewing over whether those deals are good enough. And so I think that the one question that I have open in my mind is, should we go one at a time or should we announce a bundle all at once? Because we have so much progress made so quickly. And don't forget, because this president's plan was pretty much sketched the way you and I have talked about it right from the beginning, even before he was inaugurated. And so there have been a heck of a lot of talks that have been ongoing throughout the time that we've been here. And so even before the Reciprocal Trade Act was announced, I think we had 2 or 3 deals that were very, very close to being closed. And so the president will decide when he's satisfied with a deal and when he wants to announce it and how many all at once. But I can tell you the progress has been astonishing.
Well, I love the idea of a bundle of countries that you're going to announce, so we'll stay close on that one. I know that the other major piece of this that President Trump has been working on is to sell America's oil and gas to our friends in Europe. Where are we on that, and is that also becoming part of the negotiations?
It is. The negotiations are very complex, and we want to make sure that our allies in Asia understand that we've got really, really big plans for Alaskan oil and natural gas, and we've got a heck of a lot of new drilling going on in the U.S. that'll help us ship LNG to Europe. And discussions are very, very much underway in both of those directions, both the Atlantic and the Pacific. So,
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the Asian countries, because Xi Jinping is trying to do deals with Asian countries against the United States. It sounds like he's in Vietnam today, and I wonder what else needs to be done to offset or push back against the negative behavior from communist China. I spoke with Stephen Miller about it yesterday. Here's the Deputy White House Chief of Policy. Watch.
The United States also has considerable and profound economic leverage over China. First and most importantly, we underwrite the entire country. All of its development, all of its industrialization, all of its economic subsidies, all of those. When you see those photos of what cities in China looked like 10, 20 years ago, barren, desolate, and now these glittering skyscrapers, who do you think's paid for all of that? We did. There are many things that are essential to China's security that they need from the United States. So China would be very wise to pursue the path of de-escalation.
So, Kevin, we did a whole series about this in my Underwriting the Enemy series on Fox Nation, that we are underwriting the enemy, paying for all of this. As you just heard, what else needs to be done to smack down communist China as it tries to undermine America at every turn?
Well, I think that the president will decide when and if it's time to have talks with China. But meanwhile, I think that there are so many positive developments we could make that put even indirect pressure on China. So going back to the energy issue, China doesn't really have energy to offer to Vietnam, but the U.S. sure does. And when we get this new pipeline built in Alaska, then we can make offtake agreements for Asian countries that make them energy independent, or dependent on us, but energy independent from anybody else in the world. And they're all lining up to get such agreements. And it's not necessarily helping China build coalitions with them, because they, have all sorts of strings attached, and we're just giving them security, both actual security and economic security. And so I think that everybody hopes that cooler heads will prevail. I can say for myself, I've been studying China my whole life. 2 of my family members are fluent Mandarin speakers, and I understand that China's in a difficult spot, but the president will decide what to do next. He's the one. He and Secretary of State Rubio are on the case.
Is a deal with European Union close? I know Giorgia Meloni is going to be at the White House on Thursday, but that's just one country of the EU.
There have been a lot of discussions with the EU. I myself, along with the rest of the trade team, have met with them numerous times, and we're making enormous progress. It's going to be very good for American workers, especially American auto workers, we think.
All right, real quick on this. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker is demanding Congress investigate the White House. He claims there was insider trading, Kevin, because the stock market jumped on Wednesday on President Trump's pausing the tariffs. What's the response from the White House?
There was no insider trading at the White House. But I can say that when there are big movements in markets, that there are people around town that investigate to make sure that nothing funny was happening. The issues will be investigated by the right officials, but I'm sure it's not anything to do with the White House. But there were big movements, and whenever there are big movements like that, it's very important to have the right people investigate what was going on around those movements.
Kevin, real quick, are you expecting a recession this year?
100% not. 100% not. If you look at the jobs numbers, they're very strong. When I talk anecdotally to CEOs, I say things like, well, geez, is the uncertainty over tariffs looking like it's going to be a big drag? And they're saying things like, no, in terms of production, we're getting as much onshore as we can. And in terms of sales of foreign goods, people are buying as many as they can because they're worried about future tariffs. And so everything's through the roof, anecdotally, with the CEOs I've been talking to. And the hard data on jobs have been really good.
All right, 100% not. I like that. Kevin, it's great to see you this morning. We so appreciate your time.
Maria.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.